Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming up the hill to our beautiful campus to hear our Fall 2019 distinguished speaker, Dr. Karen Gedney. Thank you. I'm Diane Cheseldine, the founder of the Distinguished Speaker Series. And I know we're all eager to hear Dr. Gedney begin, and she asked me to make it short, so I'm going to do my best. But I do want to be sure to thank some entities. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration for their generous grant in support of this evening's event. And I'd like to thank Camille Vega, who's here with us, who is the counselor, is the coordinator in the TMCC Counseling Center, and I want to thank her for facilitating the processing of the grant, getting the money. So thank you, Camille. Unfortunately, my right-hand person is not here this evening because she's ill, but I do want to thank Dawn Ingraham, who's the executive assistant to the Sciences Division. And she, as I mentioned, she's ill. And somebody mentioned that there's a doctor in the house tonight. Do you know who that might be? Okay, if you find him or her, would you let me know so I could help Dawn? And I do mention her because she has, this is our 19th year, and for many of those years, Dawn has worked very hard behind the scenes and wearing more hats than I could even list. And I just am deeply appreciative of that. And she's very disappointed that she couldn't get out of bed to be here this evening. But I know that she'll be the first person to watch Tim's video tonight. And I want to thank also Tim Ill, he told me that he cut class to do his videotaping tonight. So I'm sort of caught in between, I am still teaching, so when I hear of students cutting class. So some of you a lot of you, I think, I'm seeing this evening, know Dr. Gedney or have heard of her. And so if you haven't, you are in for a thought-provoking evening, an excellent evening. And when I heard her speak last spring at Ollie, I felt that she really is a born speaker. And as some of you may know, that I'm sometimes known as a speaker stalker, so I did my thing. So I will just name one of her honors, which is she won the Heroes for Humanity Award for her work in HIV in the correctional system. And so now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gedney, and she's here to talk about her journey from with her own voice and from her own heart. So welcome, Dr. Gedney. Thank you.
Can you hear me with this? Right. I want to thank all of you for taking your time tonight to join me on our holistic approach to prison reform. And I want to cover three things tonight. I want to cover why I think prison reform is important, what actually a holistic approach looks like when you try to tackle that, and how do we accomplish it. Now, I must admit that I never thought about prison reform or prisons in general until I was placed in a male medium security prison in 1987 to do a 4-year payback for a medical school scholarship that I had received. And I knew that after my 4 years of med school, the 3 years of internal medicine residency, that I would be placed inside of some area that had no doctor whatsoever. When I signed my contract, No one mentioned prisons. I can tell you that. Nobody mentioned that. And I'd like you to imagine what the prison thought when a tall, blonde, and that's a young female, like over 32 years ago, married to a black male, entered a male prison in Carson City in 1987. You could make a movie, really, from that scenario. So to get you a little oriented to why I'm talking about prison reform, if you don't have a sense of mass incarceration in our country, then you sort of don't understand why prison reform is so important. And I just want to show you, and I only promise only one graph, because I used to hate slides with graphs, but only one. And this one gives you the number of people incarcerated per 100,000 population, okay? And on the bottom line, you have from 1925 to 2010. But what I find extraordinary is this. Look at the red line. That's state prisons. Literally for 50 years, we are sort of just sitting around low on the bottom, and all of a sudden, our inmates behind those prison walls shoots up like a rocket. And that increases 4 to 5-fold. How does that happen? Do you realize that in the rest of the world, the rest of the industrialized countries, that did not happen? Why did it happen in the United States? Okay. One, Nixon's war on drugs, where there was the push to give very lengthy sentences to individuals who had possession, sales, manufacturing of drugs. Reagan policies that dumped out a lot of mentally ill on the streets, where some of their behaviors sort of caused them to fall back into the criminal justice system. You had the get tough on crime mentality, where you have long mandatory minimum sentences, the 3 strikes and you're out law, the habitual law, where you could be literally on your 3rd offense a shoplifter and go to prison for a lengthy amount of time. The predatory bail bond issues, which really affected the poor. And do not forget the private prisons that started around that time. And they pushed policies and pushed legislators to have laws to fill those beds to maintain their profit. That is how we shot up like that. That's what the historians say when they try to figure out why we're such an outlier in terms of incarceration. And I know some people might think, well, yeah, Gedney, more people in prison, less crime. If you look at other industrialized countries, and I'm going to take Germany as an example, because that's where all my relatives are, they have 1/10 of the prison population per capita, and 50% less violent crimes. Now just imagine, what if we could do that? That is what I would like to see, that we reduce that population by a good 90% and reduce half our violent crimes in our country. Now, what happens when you have a complex problem? It's swollen, it's giving people headaches. I suggest ICE, where today ICE stands for the I for insight, the C for compassion, and the E for evolve. Plus, I just thought that picture was highly adorable. I don't know about you. And, by the way, the teddy bear is known for compassion. If you ever heard the story, that bear is named after Teddy Roosevelt when he decided not to kill the scrawny little female bear they tied to a post for him to have a kill. That turned into a plush toy, and it's known for compassion. How about this? For me, I want to give you some prison stories and some insights about what it was like to be a prison doctor. And some of the stories I'm going to share with you tonight will give you hopefully a little idea of why I really push insight and compassion in the holistic approach. In my second year of my 4-year commitment, we're talking 1989, I ended up walking into the prison, Northern Nevada Correctional Center, which is on the outskirts of Carson City. And I walk in through those gate doors and heard all the clanging and go past the lieutenant's area where they're eating their donuts and drinking their coffee. And they push the little button, and that allows me into the medical clinic, which was very small at that time. Years later, they built a 120-bed hospital that literally sat on my prison grounds. But in those days, it was this dinky little clinic, and it had a little med room, triage room. We had 20 in-house hospital beds in the back, and my office, which also doubled as my exam room, was on the way end of this long hallway. And that's where I did my work every day. And that morning, an inmate who was known as Moth on the yard, that's a depiction of him, he came in and he sat down, and Moth was a lifer, which meant that he had no chance of parole, ever, a life without. I had seen him a number of times for medical and psych issues related to him being in the Vietnam War, where, let's just say, he was damaged. He was a Marine, damaged, and I had seen him a number of times. And I knew he sort of sat on that edge, and I thought maybe I could help him. And that morning, when he came in, he sat down and leaned over my desk, and he goes, "Dr. Gedney, you know what day it is today?" And I said, October, Friday the 13th. And the hair started going up on the back of my neck when he looked at me with those cold gray eyes, and he said, "And that's the day you're going to watch me die." I got up to get out of my room, tried to get around my big desk. His hands went around my neck. I'm like spinning in the air, laying upside down on the other side of the desk. On my wrist, which I thought I broke, slams the heavy desk into me, and I'm taken hostage. 4 hours goes by before he says, "I'm going to fuck you dead or alive." I chose alive. I'm pragmatic German. That sounds better to me over there, right? It's cold, it's dark, 6, 7, 8 hours goes by, and I think, everybody's going home to let me die. And then all of a sudden these brilliant lights hit the room, and the room seems to expand out and collapse slow in, and there's these sounds, and I thought, poor Clifton, my husband then of only 2 years, I never even gave you a baby. And then all of a sudden there's this big guy in a flak jacket yelling and screaming at me and dragging me across Moth's dead, bloody body. When I finally got home that night, I was so wired, so I couldn't think. I didn't know what to do. And then I did what my German mother, Eva Maria Charlotte Brinker, had taught me as a kid. I scrubbed and cleaned every single floor in my house and went back to work on Monday. This is what a German does. And I walk into the room. There's still a hole in the wall where they had sledgehammered a kick-out panel and thrown in the grenade. When I step on the tiles, there's still blood oozing up through those little cracks. And then the worst thing possible happened to me. Nobody said anything to me. Not custody, not administration, not staff. But there was one group who did say something to me. And who was that? The inmates. Every time they saw me, they made sure I was okay. They sent me dozens of get well cards. That card was signed by 43 lifers, men who would never leave prison. And they showed me, they cared, they showed me compassion, and they helped me heal. And that's one of the reasons I stayed another 28 years as their doctor. And I want to talk a little bit about compassion in a prison and compassion in general for healing. That helped me heal. But I will tell you, the greatest thing that helped me heal was to look at the person who raped and assaulted me. Now, he was dead, but to look at him and try to find the compassion for him so I could let go of my anger. And when I looked at Moth, by the way, is Kenneth Miller. A bit famous because if you ever go on Highway 50, it says Gary Gifford Memorial Highway. Kenneth Miller killed the first police guy in Nevada. And Moth Miller, he was a very damaged soul because he was trained as a young man to go into Vietnam and kill people he had nothing against, and that really messed him up. And when he came back, he wanted to get out of the US, did a robbery, and ended up killing a policeman. And then he was in prison forever. And this guy was bright, creative, tortured, a bit of a narcissist. And it was too painful for him to even conceive of spending an entire life with no hope. And he took me hostage to get himself killed, right? And that's why he did that. And I had to literally, to get over my anger, be compassionate toward him. Believe it or not, it took me longer to get over the anger I had against the prison system, because I believed there were certain powers who actually would have preferred me dead. And part of the reason was the good old boy network guard, old guard mentality very much was compassion's a weakness, vulnerability, security, risk. We don't want to see it. They've got nothing coming. And we've always done it this way. That sort of mentality. I did not fit in that mentality. What do we do in a prison, though? You have leadership, and I had the ability to see about 10 different prison directors, 9 different wardens, and I saw individuals with leadership skills that had compassion and those who didn't have compassion. And I will tell you without a doubt that in a prison culture, you need individuals in leadership positions who have the ability to have compassion. And that is because with that comes the ability to try to understand what's going on in the inmate and try to understand what are the root causes for the behavior, because that's the only way you can change things around. And education is great if it's taught by the right people who are compassionate and believe that their students are going to do well in the outside world. And the things that heal inside of prisons, and I've seen different things, different programs, different education, different workshops, work, purposeful work, and it always had to do with who was behind it and what was their intent. And if their intent was that they wanted to help, and they wanted to inspire, and they wanted those individuals to succeed, that makes all the difference. And we want the men and women behind bars, when they leave, we want them less of a risk to society and more of an asset. And you can talk about all sorts of different things on the inside, but unless you have that piece, that's the catalyst that you need. Now, I'm going to embarrass Sean Griffin, because Sean's in our audience tonight, and I'm showcasing him as one of the teachers I knew who exemplified what I'm talking about. Because I had the ability to watch the inmates in my institution and what really resonated with them. And for those of you who don't know Sean Griffin, by the way, he's the one in the striped shirt, okay? Sean is the poet laureate for the state of Nevada. He did a workshop at Northern Nevada Correctional Center, which he still does. Been going on 28 years. And it is a poetry and creative writing class. And here's what's unique for the inmates. One, that's a different type of education. That's a type of education that sometimes allows men to unlock what, let's say, at an emotional, soul, heart level, is really what's bothering them, and the ability to express it on paper in a way where they are not vulnerable in a prison. And that is very difficult for men in the prison. Now, this was taken 1 month ago at the 6th Annual Nevada Humanities Crawl. Anybody went to the crawl? Yay, a couple of people went to the Nevada Humanities Crawl. If you haven't gone, you need to go to the Nevada Humanities Crawl. And at this, they bring in a keynote speaker from the outside world, and that's the big guy in red, Kesey Lemon, who's a professor from Mississippi. And what they do is they showcase authors and poets, and Sean had a workshop showing what Northern Nevada Correctional Center was doing. And these are 3 of his students. But the reason I'm writing this slide up is I want to show you what's possible. This gentleman, Cornell, did about 28 years on and off in the system. And he really feels that Sean is even more than a teacher. He's a true mentor, friend, and I would say even a father figure. But Cornell did a bachelor's at UNLV, now is in a master's program in public policy, and he really wants to change the policies that put him at risk for ending up in prison. And he's working full-time as well in a substance abuse facility. Okay? The guy who's smiling with a little cocked head over there, that's Darrell. He did 12 years, but he had a very bad cancer and was fighting cancer and told me that, and I took care of him for the cancer, but he told me that the reason he beat the cancer and survived was because he had the ability every 2 weeks to look forward to that class where he said he could feel human and escape the prison. That's what kept him alive from cancer. Izzy, on the bottom, did 26 years flat in the prison. And he is extraordinary in regards to his artistic talent, his poetry, but he told me that if it wasn't for that class, he would have left without a soul at all. And he is also the one who's done the illustrations in my book, and that picture of moth was by Izzy Ismail Santillanes. But I do this just to show you the story behind why I think compassion is so important. And there's all different ways to have this healing approach in a prison. We had one prison director, Jackie Crawford, who I felt was one of the most compassionate, open-minded, and confident prison directors we ever had. And under her, we had some of the most incredible programs where I can't even make you imagine how much that transformed people's lives. Unless you had a dog and never had an individual who ever loved you in your life, and that dog unconditionally loves you, right? So what happened was Jackie got in touch with the SPCA, and they're like, oh yeah, we got all these pit mixes and these totally unadoptable dogs, and we don't know what to do with them. And Jackie had heard about this type of program in other parts of the country. And so they worked together, and they brought it to Nevada State Prison. At that time, that's now closed. Nevada State Prison was built in 1862, before our state was even a state. It was a territorial prison. That was an old place. And it was the maximum security prison in the old days. And the puppies first started out at that prison. And initially, the officers did not want, they thought Jackie was nuts for bringing in the dogs, and they tried to sort of dismantle it. But the inmates, who maybe never got along before, decided, no, we've got to be cool and work together to protect the dogs. And the violence on that prison yard dropped. And I should know, I had to take care of the violence and all the jaw fractures. The first summer those dogs hit the yard was the first summer I didn't have a jaw fracture at Nevada State Prison in a summer, okay? And one of the wardens, Greg Smith, told me that if things got dicey on the yard, he would bring out the dog and walk through the cell block. That's the power of that program. Here's another program that Jackie brought in. This is the Mustang program. It's at Stewart Conservation Camp next to the prison I worked at in Carson City. This program has got national attention. And this is sort of a win-win for everybody. If you're a horse lover, the iconic Mustangs get helped because instead of killing him, they bring him over to the prison, and they've got one of those horse whisperer types who trains the inmates in gentling these horses. These horses are then auctioned off, some as high as $15,000 have been brought in. That pays for that program, and these men develop patience, discipline, skill, and I suppose very tight thigh muscles, to keep on that horse and things like that. Plus, anytime they're involved in programs, even if they get little bings and dings, they do not complain to medical. If a guy is involved in a program that they don't want to be taken out of, they don't whine to you. They don't moan and complain, right? Anybody saw the movie Mustang last year? A couple of you? Okay. That was filmed at Nevada State Prison. The executive director was Robert Redford. He had heard about this program. He loves Mustangs, it appears. And he was the executive producer of that movie. And I saw that movie filmed because I sit on the Nevada State Prison Preservation Board, and I helped do security on the movie. And 4 of my inmates were in the movie, and they have jobs in the outside world as horse trainers. Another great program that Jackie put together, because she had this foresight, and she was a prison director around 2000, 2001. She saw that the geriatric population in the prison was really taking off. And she realized, wow, we've got all these old guys, demented, in wheelchairs, and the young guys are picking on, what do you really do with these guys? And she developed a senior structured living program in one of the units that was called True Grit. And these guys had their whole days structured. They ended up doing crafts, crocheting cat baskets that were, hats and gloves, yarn was donated. They got approval to get musical instruments into that program. When music came into that particular unit, those old guys, many who were musicians, by the way, who whined and complained and drove the medical and psych department absolutely out of their mind, once music came in, they didn't complain anymore. Now, I'm going to shift gears. I wanted just to get a little taste of potential healing inside a prison, and there's different ways to heal. And we need the type of leadership that is open to different things that will work. But what happens when you let them out of prison? What we do not want as a society is they end up homeless and on the streets and begging and trying to survive by crime. And plus, I feel sorry for that dog, too. He needs a good house. And that poor guy, obviously, is not happy about his situation, right? So what do you do with reintegration? The whole reentry system has to start in the prison to begin with, which doesn't happen that well. And the legislature in 2017 said, man, you guys are doing reentry not well at all. And the prison and the parole board, you guys should sort of get together and get organized here. Because usually when you have different silos, the prison's like, okay, we locked him up, now it's your problem. And that's not a holistic approach. All these different players in the mix have to be oriented that when people leave, that they succeed. And I'm just going to show you some of the things that have worked. One is the Northern Nevada Transitional Housing Unit. This is a great concept where, and this is Lieutenant Wilson, and they need more officers like this. But this unit sits in Reno. It's got about 100 or so beds, and the men are still incarcerated. But what happens is they live there, and then they go out and they work all day long, and then they come back. They get educational programs there, like goals and strategy and life skills. And they also have the ability to hook into TMCC's program with Camille over there. Wave, Camille. The reentry lady, who actually is a great advocate for the inmate population. And those guys, when they come to that program, they get certifications in businesses like OSHA, forklift, HVAC, things like that, where they actually have marketable skills when they leave. That is a successful, very successful program. And there's the reentry program for ex-felons from TMCC. And notice everyone's smiling in that picture. There's another good thing. But we need more and more programs where, in the holistic way, you have the prison helping with reentry, you have the colleges helping with reentry, and society willing to hire ex-felons and educated about ex-felons. There are also a number of nonprofits out there, and they have arisen because they felt the need and they didn't see the need. My Journey Home is a nonprofit run by Elaine Voigt, and I ran into Elaine many years ago. Elaine's story is here she's a mother. Her 15-year-old son gets thrown into prison for 11 years, and she loses her job because someone says, I don't know if you can trust that woman, her son's in prison, and they fired her. And she became very empathetic for families who had people incarcerated. And she ended up starting her little organization to help the families. And now she's helping ex-felons in terms of job placement. I talked to her recently, and she says she has 19 employers. And she instructs businesses that they can get tax credits for hiring an ex-felon, and can even get bonded, things like that, to help businesses take a chance. The other nonprofit out there, and we have Renee here, and who else from, anybody else from the Ridge? Okay, Renee's here. The Ridge House is unique. What happened is, over 30-odd years ago, there was a prison ministry group who came in to my facility. And they gave services, religious services, to the inmates to help them. And they realized, once they got to know the inmates, hey, these guys are coming out, and there's nowhere to go. Imagine yourself, that you've been in prison for 20 or 30 years, and then all of a sudden, someone lets you out, and you have your little gate money, like $28 the prison gives you gate money. You have nowhere to go, no house, no job, you don't know anybody. Many times you don't have any legitimate identification, and you're out. How many are you going to survive? Very few. And the Ridge House was born out of that, where the prison ministry group said, this doesn't work. In fact, I was told that the prison ministry group initially had guys sleeping on their couch in their house, and then they decided maybe not that great of an idea, okay? And then they developed this nonprofit which has survived to this day and is doing extremely well. I sit on the board for this, by the way. And they have transitional housing. They have a number of houses that individuals with substance abuse problems involved in the criminal justice system, including ex-felons leaving, have a place to go to. And they have very, very empathetic, compassionate counselors who help them with psych services, hook them up with medical services, help them get a job. Now, we've talked about healing. We've talked about reintegration. And this is my favorite piece, and that is prevention. Because as a doc, I realized that Benjamin Franklin knew what he was talking about when he said an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If we can prevent people from entering in the first place. And how do you do that? Well, for one thing, I look at children at risk, because the best thing is to go as low as possible and prevent the kids who are at the highest risk for getting in a prison system. And the kids at highest risk are minority children who have one parent in prison. The stats now are, you're minority, you got one parent in prison, 70% chance you will end up in prison in your lifetime. That's the stats. That's ridiculous. And that has to be changed. Now, there's information and little research that if that child, though, had one decent adult mentor that truly believed in them and their lives, that risk goes down to 10%. That's how much one significant mentor can mean to a child. Because really, a child needs at least one person who loves them, who's at their bat and helps them. Now, the Big Brother, Big Sister organization is one of those organizations that hooks people up with mentors. And in fact, they're having a community breakfast in November, sort of a fundraiser for them. Because all of these nonprofits really exist from grants or donations and things like that. And to give you an example, my husband and I mentored 5 children. 3 from Big Brother, Big Sister organization, and 2 were sort of add-ons, okay? Now, the 3 oldest, we've got Jonathan, Nina, and Joseph, all college grads, okay? 4 of these children had fathers in prison. Jalissa, I got at 7 years old, and there she is, 15. And she was like a Beyonce wannabe, all right? Now, the first time I picked her up, I was with my husband, and we walk in, and her 3-year-old brother, that's Dante, he's 12 now, but he was 3 then. We both, my husband and I, looked at each other and looked at the 3-year-old who was already beating and terrorizing his grandmother and mother and controlling them, because he was a smart little kitty. And my first thought was, he's going to prison. That little kid's going to prison. Because he had only seen individuals, male individuals, basically do that. You see what I mean, right? And so my husband, he was this big black guy, platoon leader, he basically barked at the little kid and said, "Stop that!" And Dante, who was 3, his eyes got as big as saucers, and he went over and then he hugged my husband's thigh and would not let him go. And I told my husband, okay, we got to take him on too, all right? And so now he is, let's just say Dante is now my workout buddy, okay? And loves that trampoline place too. But when I asked, for example, one time I asked Jalissa when she was 12 years old, hey, can you get up? And it was some sort of little talk about something. And she was 12, and I said, hey, get up and just, you like to be the Beyonce wannabe, why don't you just stand up and say who you are and why you like to mentor, okay? So she stands up and she goes, I'm Jalissa, da-da-da, and if I didn't have a mentor I would have already committed suicide. Right? I don't know who was more shocked, right? The audience or me when she said that. Because she is a child, when you look at adverse childhood experiences, if you've ever seen that famous study by Kaiser Permanente, where they have 10 points, and if a kid has sexual, physical, mental abuse, physical and mental neglect, a parent in prison, seen violence to a mother, lower socioeconomic, drug use in the household, these things go on. Out of a score of 10, she was in a family that had 9. 9. And when I asked Dante about a mentor, he said, Clifton, who was my husband, he said, Clifton taught me to be a man, control my anger, and understand the difference between needs and wants. That's what he said at 11. So when I listen to him, it sounds like my husband's talking. That's okay. Now, I just want to wrap it up and want you to think about how to approach any problem, but especially prison reform, from the whole picture, where we have to front load with prevention. If they come into a prison, we have to heal whatever we can heal. And then when they are about to leave, we have to be thinking far ahead, where the prison has to put in place everything they need for re-entry before they go out. And that parole and probation and the prison and these outside organizations all have to work together to make sure they stay out and don't go back in to the prison. And there are different ways people can help. With prevention, you can also look at the whole legal side to push policies that reduce the types of lengthy sentences. And you see this already in the federal system, where the First Step Act sort of ratcheted down things, affected some of the federal inmates. But the federal inmates are like only 10% of the population in the United States. It's the state prisons that have to be affected. And it is my hope tonight that I can inspire some of you to be part of the solution. And I have a little handout on that other table out there, where I list the different organizations and my contact in case you want to be a piece of helping solve the problem. And when I retired in 2016, I could have gone off in the sunset, but that's a sunrise, by the way. But so it just happened. When I went off, I was a bit confused. What do I really want to do in retirement? Because I have my world in 2 areas, medicine and the correctional world. And so when I retired, I ended up writing my memoir, 30 Years Behind Bars, Trials of a Prison Doctor, and I got a whole new degree in medicine, anti-aging and regenerative medicine. That's how confused I was. And I realized that my calling is really with the correctional world, right? Because there's enough anti-aging docs out there, because that's where the money is. But this needs a voice, and I have a different type of voice, and I want to be a piece of that, let's say, movement to shift us from being the worst in the world in terms of incarceration and bring us back down. So I thank you for your attention, and if you want to buy a book, please do. If anybody's got a burning question for me. Yeah. What do you got?
Can I start?
Yes, you start.
I have a comment and a question. My name is Judge Cartledge, Coe Cartledge out of Miami. I'm a federal administrative law judge that handles Social Security disability. I review doctors, I review medical records all the time from prison inmates and from people that were in prison. Most of them in my state, Florida, and I'd be interested in your view overall, are terrible. The treatment that they get is awful. But every once in a while you run into a dedicated doctor like Dr. Gedney, and for them I really applaud what she's done and other doctors like her that take their oath, the Hippocratic Oath, to heart and really view these people as human and try to help them because they do need help. So I just wanted to thank you again, Doctor, for that from my perspective and the other judges that review these records that you guys do. The other thing my real question is,
Right.
is what is your view of privatization of prisons and how is that impacting medical treatment, whether in this state or broadly?
Well, let me share one thing that happened early in my career when the private industries came into the mix. And here I was sort of like an expert in HIV in the world. And I'll never forget ACA, okay, one of the private early companies. Their vice president came to me and said, you know, Dr. Gedney, we'd love you to work for us. And then he went on to explain the stock benefits with the amount of medical care I would deny. That was the opening conversation. Now, if that isn't telling, right? I'll never forget that. And for me, I think it is, you know, private industries have some interesting leverage because they are oriented to be efficient. I cannot say the state is that way at all. But to me, you do not want to turn over a population to a private company where their profit is based on filling beds. It's very dangerous. And if you study the private prisons, what happens is the way they generate a profit is they have to come in under the state. Now, I've lived through 2 privatizations in Nevada, once when Ely went private and once when the women prison went private, both abject failures, okay? And the reason why is that they come in and they tell the state, oh, we can get under you. Well, how do you get less when Nevada doesn't, 1, pay that much, okay? 2, if you look at the cost per inmate in our state compared to California, we're like running 26, California 65. You see, there's a lot of difference for a private company to come in and bid under 26. And in fact, I think it's actually more like 13. It depends. Ely's probably 26 in terms of security. But they have to bid too low. And what they do when they write the contract, and this is why Ely was a failure, they said, okay, we're responsible for medical care, but if the care is over $35,000, then it bounces back to you guys, the state. Now, how's that going to work, right? Just think of that. Because they can keep denying and pushing things that are sort of dicey further down the road till it's expensive, and then that person ends up being dumped back on the state. So private prisons are a bad idea, from what I've seen. Yes?
If you could have the state legislature prisons in Nevada, what would it be?
That all the players who are in the greatest amount of power sit down together and develop a strategy. Really, develop a strategy. And it has to be the key players. Because when I say holistic, you have to approach it from multiple angles, almost like the military. You have to triangulate, right? So you get the right spot. And Nevada has been too much siloed. When they say Department of Corrections, that was really never Nevada. Department of Corrections means that everybody was under the same roof. No, they changed it semantically, but there was still the prison, and then there was parole and probation. You understand the difference? They weren't really under the same wheelhouse. You need the organizations like that to be able to play with one another. And that's where you need the strategy. And also, what do you really want? I mean, to me, I'm sort of simplistic. I want that individuals don't end up there in the first place, and how do we make sure that doesn't happen? And two, if they are there, why don't we fix what's wrong that's creating the behavior, whatever it may be? And when they leave, let's make sure they succeed, because it's too expensive for them to bounce back in again. And I want them to be less of a risk to society. You know, if you can try to sell to the public, what we're doing is they're less of a risk, more of an asset. Because a lot of people are like, well, why are we doing this for them? They did these bad things. Yes, I'm not condoning the behavior at all, but I want them less of a risk when they come back to us.
On that note, I'm so struck by the terminology ex-felon, and it's
Right.
common parlance. My friend Flynn and I are both
Right.
criminal defense attorneys, and we find that there's really no X to it. You know, you're a felon and you're a felon.
Right.
And so that's unfortunate, and that's piggybacking on what you're saying. And when people get out, how are they received? And I
Right.
just have this sense that no debt that they've paid is good enough.
That's my question too.
Yes.
You check that box forever.
Exactly.
Are you a felon?
You're not really an
They're
X.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, there has been the pushback, like the no box sort of thing. And that's one of the pieces where I wrote a whole article for NSET, which is a business magazine, about the pros and cons of hiring an ex-felon, and trying to point out to businesses the pros are the tax credits, they can be bail bonded, that if they've been out 7 years, their risk is the same to another person, that if the company does due diligence, they are not going to be liable because they can be bonded, and that if you give someone a chance, they are less likely to bounce. So you have less money, you know, retraining. But if you can try to sell to businesses, this is not a bad idea. Now, obviously, there's certain crimes you don't want to put a pedophile, you know, in a kindergarten. Okay, you know, you have to know what you're doing. But there are so many jobs they could do. And we have to change the rules about, you know, if you have X crime, you don't qualify for this type of housing, you don't qualify for this type of social services, you don't qualify for food stamps or whatever it is. Those things have to be changed because they just set people up for failure. And we do want to believe in people that can change and have those second chances. Yes?
Has there been any discussion or momentum in the state legislature or with this governor with mandatory sentencing laws?
Well, you know what, that's interesting you asked that. I don't know specifically, but I went to one of those prison board hearings, and Governor Sisolak was there, and Aaron Ford, our Attorney General, was there. And I'll never forget Aaron Ford basically telling the governor, Governor, do you realize that 58% of all the parole violations are technical? That means they did not do another crime. Technical, 58%. And Sisolak was like, what? Because think of that. More than half of the people we're putting back in the prison actually didn't do another crime. They just violated a technical parole. Like when I would hear things like, you have a guy who's working in a construction company, and then the construction company takes him to California, and he's working there for a day and goes back. And then someone says, you left the state, you didn't tell your PO, you're going back to prison. I initially thought, you gotta be kidding me. You have to be crazy. So now, and I just recently talked to the sergeant at the parole and probation place, and he said that in 2017, the state legislature pushed out and said, you know, re-entry has to be, you have to do better than you have been doing, and the prison and the P&P people have to talk together. And we can't have parole and probation just dumping anyone back for these minor technical violations. Actually, the state legislature came down on them. And so the sergeant for P&P said that they are now looking at officers and going, no, that guy's too rigid thinking. We're not going to have him. Let's look at officers who can be a little bit more, let's say, social worker types than the military type, right? Because the military type is, you stepped over the line, back to prison. The social worker's like, you know, you're leaning too far over there. Let's move you back a little bit. See the difference, right? Yes.
You mentioned mentoring.
Oh, yes.
And you mentioned it quite well. But how do you get around, and to my mind,
Right.
having worked as an outsider inside of the prisons doing programs
Yes.
for the prisoners, how do you work around the regulation?
Oh, that's,
that
yes.
say,
Right.
if you're working inside the prison, you can have nothing to do with them once they get out.
Right. And there I would say, and that exists, and the mentoring I'm pushing here, right here, is for the children, okay?
Prisoners need it.
Right, and absolutely, and this is a little odd, but here I am retired, right? And thank God the prison can't tell me what to do anymore. So I mentor ex-felons now, okay? But I don't work on the inside, and I don't work on the inside anymore.
Volunteer and work on the inside.
Right, you're stuck.
Cannot.
Right, you're stuck. And that's unfortunate, and maybe the system can be changed in the way they think, because they are always worried that a volunteer can be compromised, right? But what you can do is, here you are, you understand what's going on in the prison, you would like to help. Well, you have someone who isn't a volunteer and say, hey, you know, Joe, you're just playing golf all the time, you need some purpose in life. What do you think about doing this? That's the way to do it. There's always a way without stepping outside those boundary lines. But it is true, if you are a volunteer, they do not want you interacting with the inmate population. Right, right. Now I interact with as many as ex-felons as I can find. As long as they're interested in, let's say, going toward the light, you know what I mean, right?
So kind of on that subject, what kind of advice would you give to someone who perhaps works in one of those programs in the prison?
Right.
When you have those days where you're stuck in those parameters and all you want to do is help.
Yes, yeah. Well, then I would say that you have to think of, there are different ways to help, okay? I mean, when I worked inside the prison, and here I am the doctor in the prison, and you really can't deal, what I did was, I work, and then I created programs, volunteer programs, where I did the teaching. But to me, if I was teaching, I was helping, but it was still legal. You see what I mean? And just to listen to an inmate who's having a problem as a volunteer can be very helpful if it's true listening. So there are certain things you can do that you may not think are a lot, but they are a lot to they're a lot to an inmate who is sitting there and they get exposed to someone who actually listens to them and cares enough to listen. That can make a profound effect on them. So don't think you're not helping, even though you can't get too far. Yes?
I'm interested in the holistic reentry,
Right.
and I didn't hear you talk about women. Are there programs for women that are?
The reason you didn't hear me talk about women is I never took care of women,
Okay.
right, at all. And the female prison is down toward the Las Vegas area. And it is important, you know, because women always get sort of left behind. But the female population is the fastest growing population out there. And also, when you look at the women, they of course have different needs than the men, and a lot of them have the pregnancy, baby, children at home, and this affects them significantly more than many men. And we do not want to be known as a country who's putting a lot of pregnant women and women with kiddies in prisons. But I don't take care of the women.
So are you aware of any reentry programs that are?
Not specifically, no. But Ridge House will take women. They have a house for women. There's that. But I mean, with reentry in terms of what they're doing in the South, I don't really know. You know, they've developed some, I know they developed some, like, this is weird. You know, the prison developed some beauty programs for them, but then it turned out that they couldn't get licensed in the beautician world because they were ex-felons. So that made something weird like that. Very bizarre. Yeah, very, very bizarre. Because if you're going to train someone, you want to make sure that they can actually work in that field, right? Yes?
What experiences, if any, did you have with trans men?
Trans men. Well, in the prison, when I first started, and I wouldn't, well, all right. So when I started, we had the situation where we would have men come in where they had already had the female hormones, the huge breast implants, but nothing down here. And as a young doctor, I was like, oh, wait a second, what am I doing with these individuals, right? And they said, Gedney, we don't care, just house them by plumbing, okay? So if this was here, they were put in a male prison. And I'll never forget, we had one poor gentleman who had, like, I don't know why he decided, but the Dolly Parton size, right? Which was like tearing his pec muscles. And I ordered a bra, a support bra for this guy. And the captain of security went bonkers on me. I was walking across the yard going home, and he's yelling at me, Gedney, I have to talk to you about a bra, a bra. And I'm thinking, how does he know? I don't even wear one. I've never worn one, right? You know, but he was really, he was incensed that I would order a bra for his male inmate. But if you would look, you would think, absolutely. So unfortunately, those men were housed without any special consideration. None. None. And Nevada has far less than California. And of course, California has done some surgeries, you know, and then made special allocation, but not in Nevada. Now, they have the rule that if an inmate, a trans guy on the outside, was on hormones in the outside world and can prove it, we continue those hormones on the inside. We do that. But if they come in never on hormones legally, and we have no record of it, the prison will not start it. That's sort of the rule. Sort of like you get a female hormone only if we have proof you had it before. Sort of one of those AR regulation things. Any other questions? All right, go home. Have a good time.